made headlines this year. Accidental death, opioids. It seems as if when figures such as Prince make headlines such as this, it resurfaces the talking discussion of opioids, the use or the misuse thereof. Whether it be his celebrity, familiarity to us, or his name, we all in some way, shape, form, or fashion can relate to Prince. He was a father. He was an uncle. He was a brother. He was somebody's friend. The FDA indicated that between the years of 1999 and 2014, 165,000 individuals lost their lives as a result of an opioid overdose. In 2014, 28,000 individuals lost their lives, making 2014 the highest year to date from opioid overdoses. Interestingly, half of those deaths in 2014, they were patients under the care of primary care physicians receiving prescription medications. And what's even more alarming than that, today, September 22nd, 2016, 78 individuals will lose their lives as a result of an opioid overdose, leaving 78 families in mourning. My name is Ty Washington. I'm here with my colleagues Tyra, Chris, and Joseph, here to alarm you of America's crisis, the opioid epidemic. As we progress through our presentation, we will look at topics such as what are opioids, how are they manufactured, where are they made, and where they come from. We'll also look at the types of opioids so that we would recognize them in the marketplace. We'll look at the effects of opioids, both the good and the bad, high-profile deaths for relatability. We'll look at the epidemic crisis. Where does America stand on this epidemic? Accessibility, how are individuals getting access to this medication so easily? Statistics directly from the FDA. Political positions, Trump, Clinton, how do they alike and how are they different? And then lastly, we'll look at resolve. How can we as a community do something about this epidemic plaguing our nation? First up, what is an opioid? Pictured here is an opium poppy plant. And this plant contains the properties used to make opioid medications. The inside of this plant contains a white milky substance that contains chemical properties used to manufacture this drug. Cultivation sites would take this milky substance, allow it to dry to a certain potency, and then send it off to pharmaceutical companies where the procurement process of opioid medications begins. It is also said that these same manufacturing companies have found a way to synthetically manufacture the chemical properties of this substance to mass produce opioid medications. Here is a list of most commonly used or commonly known opioid medications, some of which may sound familiar to you. Codeine, hydrocodone, Percocet, Oxycontin, morphine, Vicodin, fentanyl, which is the drug that Prince succumbed to, Dilaudid, and also the street drugs, heroin. I'll now pass it over to my colleague Chris, who will now talk to us about the pros and cons of opioid medications.
Proper short-term use of opioid can give people a pain relief and a temporary feeling of euphoria. However, there are several side effects besides getting addicted. People can experience drowsiness, lethargy, constipation, and paranoia. Higher dosage use of opioid can induce unconsciousness, then stop breathing, and eventually death. Here are some of the high-profile deaths that are documented as opioid-related. We are sorrowful for their passing. However, opioid overdose deaths, like Ty said, are happening daily, which are not publicized like these high-profile figures. It is a serious issue in our country. And now I will let Tara to tell you more about this epidemic crisis.
So just curious, by a show of hands, how many people in this classroom have known somebody or have been affected by someone that was addicted to opioids? A couple people? Well, this topic actually hit very close to home for me because a best friend of mine that I grew up with actually was my very first roommate. I grew up with her through middle school, high school, She was a gymnast, a cheerleader. She could probably tumble as good as Simone Biles. She was amazing. She had her life together. And then after we graduated high school, she got into a relationship with a street pharmacist, someone who was selling prescription drugs illegally, made them more accessible to her, and she became addicted. Eventually, she became pregnant. She was still taking the pills while she was pregnant, and she had the baby. The baby was born addicted to the drugs as well. When the baby is born addicted to the drugs, they have to provide them morphine at a high dosage, and then lower the dosage until the baby can come off of being addicted to those drugs. This happened to her not once but twice. 2 babies were taken away from her, and she still does not have custody of those children. Those kids will not know her until she decides to get her life together. So why is this a crisis now? Well, there are a vast amount of doctors prescribing these prescriptions for things such as small as arthritis and just chronic pain. So there's no wonder that people are able to access these pills, and people may have a hard life, and they think it's hard anyways, and they think this is an easier way to overcome it. Also, the rise of illegal drugs coming across the border is being more accessible to people as well. And then, according to the CDC, opioid deaths have tripled from 4,000 to 13,800 just since 1999. So, how are these drugs so accessible? Well, let's see. 250 million, not million, but billion opioids were prescribed in 2013 all across the states. So that's one way. This quantity is enough for every adult to have 1 bottle of pills, and just 1 bottle is enough to basically kill you if you take more than what you're supposed to take per day. It's also not impossible to doctor shop. If one doctor doesn't like what you say and he doesn't believe you're in pain, you can go to another doctor and tell them what they want to hear in order to prescribe these pills to you. And then also, the doctors knowingly are prescribing this medicine because it's easy for them to give this to somebody and tell them, go home and take these pills and you'll feel better, which it does make you feel better for some people. And so that's why it's also easier for people to get those, and easier for the doctors as well. And this graph is directly from the FDA, and you can see the dotted line shows you basically how many overdose deaths involving opioids, and the non-dotted line is just all drug overdose deaths. You can see that this makes up for almost half of the amount of overdoses. So I'll now pass it on to Joseph to explain to you guys the political stance on this.
Terrorism, legal immigration, and healthcare reform. Those seem to be the main hot-button topics in our 2016 presidential debate. Yet again and again, the opioid crisis continues to slip through the cracks. On both the Republican and Democratic side, this epidemic is not much talked about. For example, with the Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, he has been quoted as saying that he will stop this epidemic by only focusing on the illegal aspect. Yet he doesn't understand that there's perfectly legal prescription drugs that are also attributing to these high deaths. He hasn't given out a figure on how, if and when he is elected, if he was going to choose to fight this epidemic. And as I said earlier, that he only speaks about this when it's brought up. On the other hand, Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton has given a figure of $10 billion of federal monies that she would be willing to set aside if and when elected in order to provide training and education. She also wants to help monitor and train those that are prescribing these drugs, because after all, they are the source of the problem. And also, there is a drug, naloxone, that she thinks citizens should have higher access to. This drug counteracts the effects of opioids in an overdose situation. However, this doesn't really solve the problem. It's just putting a Band-Aid on it and waiting for it to heal. My group and I decided that the best way to go about in combating the opioid epidemic should be stricter regulation on doctors. We believe so. Should we educate the general public? The Surgeon General thinks so as well. Those that are already addicted, as well as those that prescribe these drugs, should have better screening methods. Not only for the perfectly legal prescription medications, but also for the illegal heroin, that should be combated via law enforcement. And lastly, and more controversially, medical marijuana seems like it could be a promising answer to combat chronic pain, but that's for the general public to decide, as well as the United States government. And only time will tell if that ever comes to fruition. To end this, there are some resources if anybody knows anybody that is having trouble with these opioid drugs. For instance, the University of Texas at Dallas has a Center for Students in Recovery that is a valuable resource, as well as there's an American Addiction Centers hotline that can help 24/7 if anything comes up. And it's best to stop it before it's too late and before the point of no return. And at this moment, if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer.